John Baker.
From Alabama, the bold one, Bobby Wood.
From New Jersey, Bruce Weston's fantastic USA 1.
There it comes. Yeah!
Blew my headphones
Now it's
off.
Wednesday. Now it's Wednesday.
Yeah, it's officially started.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here we are on to another clean shaven, right?
Look at you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I don't want to look like a hobo anymore. And winter's over. And it's starting to get hot already. It's like it didn't even mess around. So I'm like, man, this beard is freaking hot, dude. This thing's got to go.
It was nice. I've been driving my green car all week and the week before, and windows down, and I love it, man.
I'm thrashing, trying to get the white truck ready for lots of miles. And I'm going to do that carburetor conversion on it like ASCP once I can freaking get the truck back on the ground. I ordered some springs. Well, first I took it and got some tires. Get this. Okay, this is how bad the world has gotten. Okay, this is how lazy people are now. I got 2 new tires. The tires that I like to run are Michelin tires because it's a 60,000 or 70,000 mile rated tire, and I got 120 out of the last ones. Right? It's a good tire. You don't generally have to balance them. You don't have to throw a lot of weights at them. They're generally pretty good tires. Now, I have Alcoa wheels on my truck, and they put the plastic lug nut covers on them with an impact, right? Nice. And here's the sad part. I mean, like, okay, yeah, they blew them up with the impact, no big deal. They're freaking Alcoa wheels that are like second or third hand or fourth hand or whatever I ended up with them as, right? Yeah. But if you've ever priced anything from Alcoa wheel, it's like $60 or $70 for 8 lug nuts. Right?
Wow.
Well, there's 8 lug nuts per wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I got to get those covers. And I imagine they're probably going to cost me close to $200. So for plastic covers. Yeah. All right. Well, on to Wednesday night. I mean, but that's just how the world's going. I mean, like, there is so many incompetent people in the alignment shop anymore, or tire shops. It's everything that was... We used to say back in the 90s about the parts store. I remember when the parts stores first started having the computers, and you went in there and you're like, what? These guys are fucking retarded, right? These guys know nothing.
Right.
And, hey, does it have air conditioning? No, it doesn't even have power steering, dude. It's got one belt on the whole damn car, right?
How does that work? How do you turn?
Yeah, it's called upper forearm strength, you know? But, yeah, that's just how the world's going. And now it's crept down into the automotive industry where you literally got people balancing tires off of a computer, knowing nothing about nothing, right? Right. And I drove it home, and I'm going 50 miles an hour, and the wheel's shaking all over. And I'm like, all right, we got to go back. You know, you can't jack up the balance so bad that 50 miles an hour, I can't handle it, right? Yeah. So I go back, and the guy's like, oh, well, did you check your drive shaft? Yeah, my drive shaft stopped fucking working from the time I drove it in here and then went home and started going home, right?
Right.
Yeah. How about you pull the tires off? We'll put them on a freaking balancer. And here's what's sad is I got a bubble balancer, and I imagine if I put it on a bubble balancer, it would show how far out it is.
Yeah.
But, oh, well, you know. All right, well, Wednesday night. Already started off with a rant. So, Twisted Mopar Garage is in here. Buff Del Campo is blessing us with his presence. Tom Brown. And Tom Brown's asking, what was the original engine in the Coyote? Hey, so are you digging the thumbnail? Did you see it? The Hardcastle and McCormick?
I was actually going to look at it, but my computer right now, I'm on StreamYard, and if I move off of this, I lose everything. So,
oh, well, don't worry about it. Yeah. So I did a Hardcastle and McCormick, and they did an actual promo shoot for their show, knowing the car was a pretty big part of it with the car, right?
Nice.
Yeah. And unlike the Fall Guy, which I was like, how do they not have a promo shot with that truck?
The truck. That is the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you guys haven't figured it out, these are all based on automotive TV shows and movies, right? That's what the whole theme is for this. Is like, I'm trying to find a duo that's automotive related for a show or a movie.
Right.
And yeah, but so what was the original engine in the Coyote? So let's see what everybody's saying. You know, whatever. Yeah. All right. Do we have any answers?
Dude, when it comes to Ford, I don't speak Ford.
Oh, no, this is not a Coyote Mustang. This is the Coyote on Hardcastle and McCormick.
Oh,
the kit
okay.
car. I'm assuming it used to be a Volkswagen motor.
I was going to say it's a Volkswagen then, probably. If I had to guess.
I'm looking for something. Nobody's said anything yet, but I may have blown past it. Who knows? I was greeting everybody. So, Mohawk 62. Fab Race Mod repeats in here from Northeast Dragway. Oh, Tom Brown says Porsche 914 engine. So, it's virtually the big brother of the Volkswagen Bug motor.
I think that was a Type 4, I believe.
It was, and it's like a 1835cc kind of motor or something like that. Oh, it's the same as in a bus. Type 4s, right?
Yes. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, the early ones. Yeah.
Okay. Tom Brown saying, okay, Porsche 914 engine, Beetle chassis. The second one used the chassis from a DeLorean, if I remember correctly. Talk about something expensive to cut up back then. Well, think about it. Like, they remember the DeLorean. It has that funky look because the entire car is made of stainless steel, right? So it does not rust. That's what I always thought was super interesting about it. Won't rust, but where are they at?
Right. Well, because they just don't run. It's that engine and transmission. The transmission, that transaxle is the problem.
Well, weren't they like a 2.8 liter Chevrolet? And that people used to dog because in the movie car would have never reached 88 miles an hour.
Ever.
Right. And if you drove anything with a 2.8 in it, back in the 80s. Now, I did hear some cool stuff where guys were doing turbos on them and superchargers and stuff, and they were pretty healthy because that 60-degree V6 really likes that. But naturally aspirated 87-octane early 80s smog motor, this thing was an anemic turd, and you needed something less than 2,800 pounds to pull it around. And I think that DeLorean comes in around like 34.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty heavy. It's stainless, and then it's got that independent front and rear suspension. So let's see. Danny Boyd. Let's see. A Cove. Junkyard D. Bill McKyska's in here. Dakota's Timeout's in here. Twisted Mopar Garage made it.
Nice.
Jupiter Mustang Mike is here. And Clayton's Toolbox. Colleen Tebow. Michael Roberts. Yeah, Danny Boyd said when he was talking about the parts store guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Michael Schmidt's here.
That's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah. He says, hello, all dropping by for a few minutes before heading out to a Blondie concert. That's pretty awesome. At the Greek. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah. Do you know that at Thai Greek, do you know that my very first concert ever was in 1981 Blondie Rapture Tour at the San Diego Sports Arena?
Oh, Sports Arena is one of my favorite places to go see a concert, dude. That place has the ambiance. The first time I went there to see a concert was Metallica. Right?
Oh, in 91?
No, I was not in San Diego in 91. I was still young. I was just still in junior high in 91. Or, no, I was in high school. But I saw it was the Load album tour.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And I remember James Hetfield was like, anybody want to hear some new stuff? And everybody's like, boo! Right? Oh, you want to hear some old stuff? Yeah! And then that's all they did, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, let's see here. But yeah, I don't know if did you ever go see him there?
Oh, yeah. I saw Metallica,
Metallica
when they came out with the Black Album. I think it was 91 or 92.
Yeah, 91. Too.
91. And I was there both nights. In fact, funny story. Back when you used to go and wait in line at Tower Records, I waited 2 days for the Black Album to come out. I was technically number 3 to buy it.
At the Tower Records on Sports Arena?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, because I know exactly which one you're talking about. I used to go there all the time to score. They used to have the trade-in CDs.
That's right? Exactly.
And
so,
I used to score them trade-in CDs like cheap.
Yeah, so what I did is I went out and I bought the Black Album. I'm like, Metallica. I was like super stoked, right? I go out there, I go out to my truck, I pop it in my CD player. That was actually went into my little tape deck and hit play. And I was like, okay, Enter Sandman, song number 2. I was like, song number 3, song number 4, 5, 6, 7. Literally that fast, I went back in and tried to return it, and they wouldn't return it.
Oh, really? Because it was brand new?
Well, they just wouldn't return it. I don't know, but I wasn't happy with it. I was, I was like,
because it was a departure from the norm at the time.
yeah, exactly. So I was 16 years old. I think I was 17 years old, 16 years old. So I was like, I wanted something, like old Metallica. So
right. Well, let's see. And Justice for All was the album before it, right?
yes,
So,
and that's one of my favorites.
and let's see, One is on that, right?
Yes.
Isn't that the one with One? Okay. Yeah, and that was like, that album was not a departure from their standard norm Metallica stuff. It was actually, I think, was probably, it's not the best, because I think Master of Puppets is the best. Master of Puppets is just like the top of the heap for me.
Okay.
It was one of those albums that you could literally put in, and this was before CDs. I got it on tape. You could let that sucker play, flip it, play, and it's just like it. I never was that way with One, right? Or with Injustice for All. But the Black Album, it was okay. I did like Enter Sandman when it came out, big time. And then, which is the other one? Unforgiven, I think, was on there.
Yeah, Unforgiven was on there. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to some car stuff.
Yeah.
So Danny Boyd's asking, didn't I ask the tire shop to compensate you? I didn't realize it till today. When I was taking the suspension apart, I was going to put 2 new springs in the truck to... They told me when I left the shop that I couldn't get it lined up. And, and you're talking about the lug nuts. I imagine they probably did it out of spite because I took it in there and made them rebalance the tires. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. But who knows? I took it apart today because I tried to get them to line it up and they couldn't line it up because the steering box was so bad. And he's like, dude, it's got like almost a half of a turn before it engages. Right? I'm like, yeah, that's pretty worn. So then I go look at the screw and the adjustment screw, and there's no threads left. And I'm like, all right, I think I'm pretty much used this one to its last mile. And bought a box. And here's what's funny is like I looked all over for my Pitman Arm puller. I'm like, damn, I can't find this thing. Went looking for I'll just buy another one. And they only come in a set now.
Yeah.
And they're like $85-$90, right, for a set. And I'm like, well, damn. How much is the new Pitman Arm? It was like $27. I'm like, well, problem solved. I just won't even pull the other one. I'll just send it back with the core and then put a new Pitman Arm on it, right?
Yeah.
That's it. So there we go. Problem solved. All right. Twisted Mopar Garages and LP94 Lars himself. Ed's Machine is in here saying hello, everyone. Hello, Dallas. Let's see. I think that's about it. JB is in here from JB's Little Shop, and mostly old parts and rust. I guess nice. I think I've hit just about everyone up. Everybody's greeted everyone. Mike Senior 340, hello from Illinois. That is, I think is that 2-Hack Jeff's dad? It might be 2-Hack Jeff's dad.
Huh.
Yeah. Be careful. He used to be the a Smokey. Way back in the day, right?
Right.
Let's see. Danny Boyd saying that DeLorean was 2.8 V6. That's what I thought. It was pretty anemic. They were talking about it couldn't hit 88 miles an hour if they wanted to. No, I'm pretty sure it was 2.8 GM, Buff. I think he's right. But that car, they were talking about the weight and the gear ratios on it were just so bad.
Yeah.
Because I think it does have overdrive.
It was a terrible tranny. I had to pull a couple trannies out of those things and rebuild them when I was working at Poway, that Poway transmission. It was a terrible car.
Oh, well, so Buff Del Campo, did you grow up in Rantoul? I was at the Air Force there. I grew up right outside Rantoul. Literally, my first human adult job was in Rantoul. At a place called Rantoul Products. But yes, I grew up around there. And then the year the Air Force Base closed, which was Chanute Air Force Base, was the year I entered the workforce and I had to compete against everybody unemployed. It was rough. It sucked. Yeah, so because that was the biggest employer in the area by far. Let's see. Danny Boyd says he saw Metallica in Riverfront Coliseum back in like 97 or 98. That's probably when I saw him, was right around that tour. Is that the one where they had the guy fall down from the ceiling on fire? And that's the one I remember. That was a pretty cool show. So, all right. Ed's machine says 220 grit versus 230 grit. Just a couple more grains, buddy.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it, really.
Yeah. All right. So Blake at Bad Tree is saying that the El Diablo Dart, which everybody else is calling the Murder Pumpkin, is going to be ready for the track this weekend. Well, hopefully you got your big boy pants on, because that thing looks like it's going to run a pretty decent number.
Oh, is he 2010-50 guy?
No.
Oh.
It's probably about like what your Cookie Monster was like before you started throwing a bunch of nitrous at it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, did you see I primed it? It made oil pressure.
Oh, you put a video up?
Oh, yeah. I put two videos up.
I haven't been up on YouTube. Man, I'm telling you, I've been swamped and super busy with things that I wish I wasn't doing. But, I'd much rather be doing
Car
videos.
stuff.
And I'm probably going to have to take a break from videos for a while. And this will be about the extent I'm doing for quite some time.
I put up a video that you'll love. It's about how to degree a camshaft. You'll love it. It's really simple. It's 4 minutes long. It has everything it needs in it. And the other one is I spun up the oil pump on the engine and made oil pressure. It was good. And it takes only about 110 inch-pounds. That's 4 pistons, crank, rods, camshaft.
To turn it over?
Yes. 8 lifters and all the fucking things.
Dude, so when I did that Jack the Giant Killer, that 300 Buick, the thing that impressed me is when I got it all done and set up and I had all the clearances checked 2-3 times, and I'm probably the only guy building a race engine with freaking plastic gauge, right? Mm-hmm. But I had the ratchet on that thing, and it literally, I stopped turning it over, and I had the ratchet up, and it just turned over until the ratchet fell down to the bottom.
Right? Same thing.
I was like, wow, she's freaking loose then.
Yeah, I said that same thing. She's as loose as a goose because man, I could break it free at about 130 inch-pounds, and then it would turn at about 110 inch-pounds, and then I would let go of it, and it would continue to rotate. And that's gear drive, camshaft, all the pistons, rods, and the lifters are in there,
and valve springs on it.
But I didn't put the rockers on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well that'll make a big difference.
Oh yeah.
But, I was just doing the short block, and I was like, wow, this sucker's turning over easy, man. Easy peasy.
I'm actually putting new valve springs on it because I put those valve springs on it. Now, there was no rockers on it, but I put those valve springs on it in 2017. So, I just go, I work for a manufacturing company, so
So JB's Little Shop, got to hop out, trans work in progress. Man, are you going to get that 700 R4 all ironed out? I hope so. So Mohawk 62 is saying saw Mopar Joe's video today. The car is going to be hard to beat. I imagine that because he just got that. That's that big block, right? So he just got that running. And I saw I think a thumbnail on Facebook that he had it at the track.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. And he's got a whole bunch of bounties on him.
Well, that's good. I even told him. It's like, look, if you win and you wear a Mopar and you wear a Slant Daily shirt with a Slant Daily sticker and you go for a twofer, I'll give you not only the $200, but if you wear a t-shirt, I'll give you $300.
Huh.
So
man, it's up. These guys are gonna come home with a big pile of money.
Yep.
So Dust Devil Garage is saying they make a small block Mopar gear drive.
Yeah, Mylodon does. It's a fixed idler gear. It's actually the really, really good one that you want to have. It doesn't make a stupid bunch of noise. But yes, it's a Mylodon gear drive, fixed idler gear. I don't forget the part number off the top of my head, but yeah, it works incredibly well. The slack in it, you actually use newspaper as the slack in the gears. That's actually what the instructions are. I've had it forever, and it's cured all my timing issues. It works great.
Huh. And it pretty much remains forever as long as it gets lubricated, right?
It does. And well, I have an oil squirter there and everything. Of course I do. But I get oil to it.
Over the top.
Yes.
Just like how, if you're doing a race engine, that's how it has to be. If you want it to live, that's what it has to be.
Yeah, and when I prime the oiling system, you got to watch the video because it is in a cordless drill in there, and it's just barely holding on to it, and it spins it up, and you see it come up to pressure, but it's not like, and the only thing I could find for braking oil was 2050, which it's actually designed for 1040, but I had 2050 in it, and it still was easy to spin up, and it primed almost instantly.
That's what's going to be cool is like you're losing 0 horsepower with a 1030, right? 1040.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's cool and that's how you know you got it right is when and I'm telling you, it's a cordless drill, and you got to have it up in high gear, and it's not slipping the clutch. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I had it number 2 on the drill section, so there's no clutch, and it would just. It was like, oh yeah, this is good.
So Tom Brown asks, do I do the 2 feeler gauge trick on the Buick rods when tightening the caps since they don't have an alignment notch? I do, but it's just like on most factory, if it's a factory type engine, I don't really waste my time because I haven't seen anything that's shown there's really any gain. Because see, once it gets warmed up, that if it goes through that first heat cycle, everything's going to kind of settle back in where it's supposed to be anyway. But on the race stuff, I have done that. Stuff that I know is going to be beat on hard or abused or whatever. I'd go the extra mile just to make sure that it can't get the cap off just a little bit and then heat it. Because what happens if the 2 caps rub, right? It creates friction, and it'll actually blue those caps.
Yeah.
Well,
that's actually what I do on all my engines. Is when I tighten up the rod bolts, I actually put 2 feeler gauges in there, the 15 thousandths or 20 thousandths, whatever. Yeah, I put them in there and hold it so that way when you square them up, you're not twisting the rod, because there's only 2 thousandths of clearance. You're not twisting it on there because I open up that gap, quite a bit. I think it's like 22 or something like that thousandths because it doesn't really matter, because the oil's going to come out. It doesn't.
Right. Well, the more slop that it has, the easier the oil comes out.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have plenty of gap in those things on purpose. So
yeah, on a race engine, you got the bearings are loose too, right? So you got tons of oil pouring out and lubricating all that area, that surface area.
Yeah, mine are 3 thousandths, I think, across the board. I think it was, I think it was 3 on the mains and 3 on the rods is what I got.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I guess when you look at race engines that people probably don't talk about much is that the looser the race engine is, the more oil it bleeds from the rotating assembly, which actually in turn causes a bigger windage problem where you got to have a better pan to make it ideal to work.
But
right?
But it throws oil everywhere, so that way it oils like. Because right now I don't have any oil going to the lifters, right? There's nothing oiling the actual camshaft. So I'm using the oil coming from the rods to sling up onto the camshaft so that way that gets oiled. Because right now I don't have any high pressure feeding on that because mine's been copper tubed. So there's nothing oiling that. My the main galley goes right down on the passenger side through the lifter galley. So I put a copper tube on both those on those ends, so that way there's no oil loss going onto the lifters, and plus now the lifters move really easily even under pressure. But because of that, there's no oil going there. So I open up the oil going to the top, so that way when it comes down, and then also too, I allow it to come off on the rods.
Well, so there's a lot of discussion in the chat here about gear drives.
Okay.
We're talking about your gear drives, right? So Danny Boyd's saying that the gear drives are kind of bad, though, with bad vibes and harmonics.
In a race car, it doesn't make a difference.
And that's where he says right below that gear drives are more race-oriented.
Yes, right.
And there used to be a lot of guys that would drive them on the street. And here's what's funny about, like, the street-driven ones. Yes, they do have, like, what it sounds like a blower whine. But what you'll find is they freaking wear so fast on the street. You'd be better off to have like a single factory timing chain in there, right?
It's actually better, yeah. But these are like the Pete Jackson gear drives is what he's talking about. Mine's a fixed idler gear, so it literally it's bolted to the block. So it's just 2 cogs. It's actually 3 cogs that are hitting each other. So there is no thrust or pulling away as far as binding inside of the gear. So it's just basically running a gear set.
Right. Well, yours doesn't have, like the Pete Jackson gear drives have like a dog bone with two idler gears that run in between the cam and the crank, right? Now, on your setup, yours looks kind of like the idler pulley on a blower where there's one big cog, right? And it's off to the side, and it'll have a centric hub that it's on. And then the whole entire fixture is bolted to like the timing cover. Right?
Timing cover, and there's another 2 down below, so it's got 6 bolts that hold it down. So it's pretty fixed.
Yeah. And those I've never had anything. I've never had anything with a gear drive. Most of the junk I have is like, God, if they had a gear drive for a freaking Buick, it'd be like $14 billion, right?
Right.
Yeah. Got to make our money back from R&D. Oh, yeah. It was real hard to figure out to put the same gear as an AMC on there. That's what sucks about it is like I was looking at, I saw something today. Somebody sent me an email where they're working on an AMC engine and it was on a stand. And somebody sent it to me and they're like, man, look at this guy's Buick. And I'm like, wow, that does look like a Buick, but what kind of weird heads are those? Right? And I was looking at it like, oh, wait, that's an AMC, dude. Like, look at the oil pump on it. It looks way different. It took me a while to catch it, though. Let's see. Danny Boyd says, my Ford 260 inline 6 is gear-driven. A lot of the inline 6 were, and the diesel applications generally were inline 6, were gear-driven. The cam and timing, or the timing set was gear-driven. And that's just for really robustness. Yeah. Right?
No stretch. That was the problem. On my cars, that's why I went to that gear drive, is because I was running such high RPMs and spring pressures that even a dual roller timing chain would last 6 months, and my timing would just go erratic, and the car would slow down. It wasn't consistent. So then I bought that fixed idler gear, and then all that went away. Literally, you watch it, and it's dead steady. Even though it's all the way at the back of the camshaft. Normally that would be something bad, but it actually is pretty rock steady.
Yeah. So I must have missed one. Okay. 38 POS Racing says the Corvair is gear drive for the cam, for the cam, just cam and crank, no idler pulley.
Yeah, because it's gear to gear, just like a Volkswagen. Volkswagen's gear to gear also.
Yeah, Buff Del Campo says Studebakers are gear drive, and then Tom Brown says his my old 250 Chevy and 85 Toyota F2 are both gear drive inline 6s, and both have over 300,000 miles. This inline 6 that used to be that was the magic thing behind a lot of those inline 6s. Why they lasted so dang long was that gear drive.
Yeah, and the Ford 300, I think, is also gear to gear.
Well, if you remember at that time, the inline motors, the big one was this. You had the thing called an interference engine, right? And when the timing belts went tits up, 2.3 Ford, they would bend every valve in the head.
Yeah,
right.
Hondas were famous for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, man, how come like 306 doesn't do that, or a 244, and it was because they were gear driven and they didn't have to worry about the belt or the timing chain or anything like that stretching. A lot of the stuff from the 70s was kind of lame when it comes to timing systems on it. Like a lot of the Buicks, the focus was on noise, vibration, and harshness, NVH they call it, and they had nylon toothed gears in them, and they were great. They were quiet and all that stuff up until about 50,000 miles. 50,000 miles, the teeth, you'd start finding the teeth in the pickup, right? And it's like if you drain the oil and you're like, what is this holding up my oil from coming out, right? And it's like this yellow. That's the teeth from your nylon timing chain set. They're falling off at 50,000 because what happens, not so much the wear, it's the heat cycles. Plastic does not like heat cycling.
No.
And then oil will break it down. Oil will break because plastic is a derivative of oil. It's like having, I don't know, paint and paint thinner. It's the same kind of principle.
Yeah.
But let's see. Mohawk 62 says, had an aluminum cam gear on my steel crank gear in my 250 inline 6 Chevy. It went zing, zing, zing.
Yep.
Huh.
That's they're famous for that. Same with the Fords. The 300 inline, which was the heavy duty or the industrial one, was also aluminum on steel. But then the car ones were with that plastic on steel.
Yeah, and that's what Mike Senior's here saying, that fiber gear old school. Yeah, man, I'm telling you, there was so many of them things I'd change, and it's like you would just even in the early 90s, I had kids I went to school with. Hey, man, my car is running like crap. Can you give it a tune-up? And I'd call them up. Man, I bet you the timing chain is fragged in this thing, And you do a timing chain swap, or just a timing chain swap on it, and it'd pick up 30 more horsepower, right? Wow, you guys really know how to tune them up. Well, yeah, and put a timing chain in them,
right?
Get timing back to where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but, I did that on the wife's car, on her on the Beaver, because it just was nothing. And then I put a new timing chain on it, and man, it just woke that thing right up. You can actually drive the car now. Works great.
See, and it makes a big difference, especially when the cam goes like 4 or 8 degrees retarded because it's got so much slop.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Let's see. Doug Narton says he loves the Cummins 6BT and 4BT. I can't believe how damn expensive 4BTs have become. It's cheaper to buy a 6BT. And what's funny is like the Cummins, and a lot of these people might already know it, the Cummins is literally one cylinder. And then if you have a 6-cylinder version of it, it's 6 of that one cylinder in a row.
Yeah.
The 4BT, the 4BT is the same thing. It's 4 of that one cylinder in a row, right?
Yeah.
And I always wondered if you could literally just go in there and cut 2 cylinders off of a 6BT and have a 4BT.
But that's a big block to weld back together.
Not welding. You just go in there and cut 2 cylinders off.
Yeah, but then you would have no flex plate. You'd have nowhere to put the flywheel.
What if you cut it off the front?
Well, that's where all the gear and stuff. They all bolt to that block. There's a lot. Yeah, the
are they like
block,
that?
Yeah.
At each journal? That's what I'm wondering.
No. The actual front of the block is there's a lot of things that bolt to the front. Like
okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Like for all the timing and for the injectors and so on and so forth.
Well, there goes that idea. As you can tell, I've never seen a Cummins completely apart, but I always wondered if you could do that, if they would separate, like where you could go in there with a bandsaw and cut, directly 2 cylinders off the front, and bang, all that same stuff is still there. That would be pretty bitchin'.
Yeah.
So, Fab Race Mod Repeat says that Flathead Fords are gear drive. Let's see.
Yeah.
That's probably why they were around so long, why it was such a reliable engine. Let's see. Dust Devil Garage. Is that a 360 in the Cookie Monster?
The block is a 360. That is correct.
Let's see. Tom Brown says that the Toyota F and 2F is based on the Chevy 261 and was even built under license of GM for the first 3 years. That's not the first time I've heard stuff like that. When Toyota went NASCAR racing,
they took the best of everyone and made their own engine.
and it gave it a Chevrolet bell housing, right?
Yeah.
And the idea was so they could use the existing transmissions and bell housing in NASCAR, or when you go into mass production, you could put a Turbo 400 right behind it, right? Or a Pound Glide, or a Turbo 350. That was the idea. They didn't have to have a good transmission because when you went racing, it bolted right up. So I thought that was very smart on their part.
The person who asked about the 360, the engine is the reason why I went 360 is because at the time I was poor, and 340s were super hard to find. And 360s, I could find a 79 Cordoba with brass freeze plugs because that means it had been rebuilt for $79 at the pick apart, and I could change the intake. And we've talked about this before, and camshaft, and I'd put a 250 shot to it, open up the spring, the gap, and call it good. And I was off to racing. So I just stuck with the 360s just because all my crankshafts that I had the bigger journals for the 360s. So that's why I've stayed with those. Just why I had them.
Huh.
And 340s are super expensive now.
Oh, 340s are?
Yeah. People
That
just
sucks.
Yeah, and they have the 340 and the 318 have the same crankshaft, same stroke, but it's just got a bigger bore. So a 360 is a 4-inch bore, a 340 is a 4040 bore. So I just got a 360 and has a little longer stroke, so I just dealt with it.
That's why I like the 300. The 300's an odd duck, but it has those smaller mains like a 318. See, that what I've noticed is the engines with the smaller mains are happier small cubic inch engines. They're happier. And has something to do with that the bearing speed on it. Has almost everything
100%.
to do with it.
Well, also too, if you get a wheel and you just start spinning a wheel that's got a big diameter, you're going to have a lot more forces to deal with.
Right.
So whenever you get a main that's farther apart, you're going to have a lot of forces, to deal with that. You don't have to with something that's smaller.
Well, I'm just planning on I will eventually one day do a full boat, no holds barred 300 Buick with the weirdest crap ever going on. And I've actually been considering like how can I make the mains even smaller by using but bearing spacers and the whole 9 yards, because so here's what's interesting. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is very similar across the board. As long as, like, say, Buick 350, I've always had a hard time. Buick 350, big mains, big 3-inch mains, and that's because the stroke on it's 385. So they had to have some kind of overlap. So you made a large main to compensate for that, which in turn actually makes it more inherently strong, right?
Yep.
Big main block. The problem is that bearing speed is so counterproductive on a small cubic inch engine. If you got, let's say, 450 cubic inches and you got a 3-inch main, you don't really notice it. You have 350 cubic inches and you got a 3-inch main. I'll put it in perspective for you. The Chevrolet Small Block has a 2.5-inch main, or maybe 2 3/4 or something, but I think it's 2.5. And then 351 Windsor, it has a 3-inch main. It's 51 more cubic inches. It's actually 50 more cubic inches than a 302 Ford, and they run completely differently, right? Same engine architecture. It's just the main size and the stroke. Matter of fact, if you do a 347 Ford, it doesn't run the same as a 351 Windsor.
Yeah.
It has something to do with that main. So I've been kicking around the idea. The cool thing, the Buick being 3-inch main, they make bearing spacers for 351 Windsors to put a 351 Cleveland crank in there, which has a 2 3/4-inch main. And it's smaller, right? And it got me thinking, like, could I take a 350 Buick crank and turn it down to 2 3/4-inch main? Would it make a big difference? Because the bearing width on it, you're just talking about, you got to whittle something, there's not much work to make that fit. There wouldn't be that much work. They're probably pretty dang close.
What I did on mine to make it live is that on the actual block itself, where the oil comes in, on the hole, I cut a groove in there, kind of like on the LS, and then added a secondary feed. So that way it gets 2 squirts of high pressure oil. So when it lines up there, and then what I did is I timed it. I don't have the numbers on me right now, but what I did is I put the crank in there and I timed it so that way the other rod was on the thrust side, so it would get an oil squirt on the one side and then also an oil squirt on the other side. So it has, and that hole is a 109, because the 109 thousandths is the exact diameter of that groove. And I'm also running a full groove bearing on them, so I think it's an MS 1266.
That's the tricks that I never learned. That actually I learned from Tony, was telling me about that. Was the full groove bearing thing. Like, you can't buy them for a Buick, right? Yeah. But you can get the half groove, and I think there is a 3/4 groove.
Yeah,
but he's like, just buy 2 sets of bearings and just put the tops in the bottom. And I'm like, oh my God, it's freaking genius. I never thought of that.
Yeah, that's what I was doing for a while until I found out the 1266, the later versions, because the early versions just were half groove. So then I'm feeding the oil, because I opened up all the oil grooves, the oil holes on it, but then the actual one that feeds the bearing is only one size. So I added 2 extra holes in there of 109 thousandths. So there's actually 2 on this, sorry, not just 1. So I grooved it this way and this way. So the diameter of that is actually bigger than the diameter feeding it. So that way there's no pressure on the back of the bearing to put pressure to push the bearing into the crank under high pressure.
Huh. Well, so here's something that I had never thought about. If you do that full groove bearing, it's getting technically twice as much oil supply.
Well, no, it gives all the oil, constant oil to the rods. So that way
that's what I was just going to say. It's twice as much oil to the rods, right? Because it's feeding through the main hole all the time.
That's right.
Okay. So instead of it being lined up halfway around, it's lined up all the time, right? Yep. Feeding the rods. Now, how much oiling system do you have to have? How much more oiling system do you have to make that work?
You have to have quite a bit. And that's the reason why I added 2 more oil holes to it, to feed it for that exact reason. So what I did is because you have that much more, you got to have twice as much oil to that main, right?
Right.
So then I opened up the oiling hole so that way it was twice as big. So everything is twice the size, feeding everything. And I'm back feeding oil in that system too. It's something I did a long time ago. I'm not going to tell people how I did it, but there's a lot of trick stuff that I've done inside that block. And because of that, that's how I'm feeding oil to that for that exact reason. Because you'll spin a rod bearing, a main bearing before a rod bearing with a full groove on a Mopar. If you do it the other way, you'll spin a rod bearing, and it's usually either the number 1 or the number 4 would be 7 or 6, because the number 4 feeds those two, and number 4 is the one that starves the most, because that's where the highest velocity, because it's trying to feed the whole front of the
right out
block.
of the pump.
Yeah, well, that's the first main that goes down from there, because the number 5 is fed straight over. This is the one that goes up, and then it goes through the lifters, and it's the first one that has to make a 90 degree and go down, but it still has to feed all those lifters, all those mains. Then number 1 goes down, up, feeds the cam, then it comes back up, and then feeds the whole lifter side. So it really starves, because when you have high velocity, you have low pressure. You have low velocity, you have high pressure. So that's the reverse of them. So if you have high velocity there, you're going to have low pressure, and it's hard for it to make that turn and go down there, because there's very low.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with oiling that I haven't really got into, because the things that I've been looking at on the Buick is, and it's dumb, because see, there's no priority main oiling. It all comes from one main oil gallery, right? So it's like literally the length of the block at the lifters. And so your lifters are bleeding off a ton, right?
That's same thing with the Mopar. Same thing on small block.
You end up losing a lot of your oil just to the lifters, and it falls down the crank because it's got nowhere to go but down. But what I was looking at was, I was thinking, take those lifter boards, and I don't know if you've ever seen a Buick, they kind of just hang out there in the space.
Yeah.
They're not really captured, right? Like, you look at a Chevrolet, and it's like, good Lord, they didn't waste any freaking cast iron on this thing.
Yeah.
And the Buick, they're thin. They got nothing. There's virtually holes there. I thought about boring that out to an 875 lifter, which is like what you use in a Ford, right? Instead of an 842. And then the cool thing is, you'd have a lot more roller lifter availability, right? Yeah. But also, you can bush that, you can brass bush that, or sleeve it, and then put just a little dinky hole in there, right? And you get the tolerance on it really tight. So then it's not losing all that oil through the lifter. It's literally just feeding it just enough, right? To keep it from collapsing. Because that's all it really needs, is just enough so it don't collapse. And if you use a solid, it's like even less. You just got to get enough to the
friction, just to overcome friction.
Right. And then to cool the spring up on the top of the head. I was thinking that was the way I was going to do it, and I was going to ream the hole in the block bigger, right?
Yeah,
through the lifter
That's
bore.
what I do. Yeah.
Oh, really? Because I've never drilled
bigger.
one. I've drilled the blocks. I've never drilled the lifter holes. And then I was thinking, just, if you drill the lifter hole, then just bush them. And you put, I'm like, man, if I'm going to bush it, I'm going to take it out big and then put the 875 lifters in it from a Ford.
Yeah. That's actually what I do, is when I put a copper tube down the oil galley, I drill it way out. I use I have a special drill bit that it's a big long one, and it's and then I use a reamer, and you come in from both directions, this way and this way, because they don't really line up, so the copper tubes are slightly off a little bit, but it works. And
I found a Buick off so bad like that, because I was knocking the plugs out, and I have just a big long dowel. It's a metal steel rod. Right, and it's like a 1/4 inch in diameter, and you just line it up. I couldn't get it through. It's a 1/4 inch.
Yeah,
I couldn't get it through there, and I'm like, holy cow, how bad is that for a freaking oil limitation on the back of that block?
That happens quite a bit on the Slant 6, because the main oil galley that goes where the pump comes in, you have one that goes forward and one that goes back. Then the oil galley goes down through the cam bearing, which is kind of like a slice. It's kind of like a fish mouth, and then it goes down to the main. And what's funny about that too is that they drill it this direction from the saddle to the oil the oil passageway that goes down the block.
Right.
So when I have that thing popped out and I'm drilling that down there to a bigger size, I think I open up to 5/16. Sometimes it doesn't even, you barely punch through. So you got to get in with your die grinder
and cut it all out. Yeah.
And cut that all out so that way you can actually get some oil going there. But yeah, I do that quite a bit.
Yeah. Oiling mods, I think, is probably, if you're willing, let's say, okay, you got a cheap engine you're going to rebuild. Before you do anything, machine work, any of it, okay?
Yeah.
Try your oiling mods. If you don't have a lot invested in it, there's not a lot to lose if you tear it up. But if you successfully complete the oiling mods, I would say, and this is me just being me, right? Mm-hmm. But I would easily have to say oiling mods can be worth 25 to 50 horsepower by themselves.
I agree 100%. Because that's exactly what I'm doing with my engine, is that I'm getting the basically the flow up, but the resistance is not there.
It's
so it's
nil.
basically
Yeah.
it's nil. Yeah. Literally, if you watch that video, you'll see that electric drill just, and I'm like, oh yeah.
Well, I'm using stock pumps, right? I use the stock pumps on the small block. I use the high pressure pump because the stock one is so like
bad.
It is like the bare minimum, because you got to remember the pump that's used on the 350, which has the 3-inch mains and the same size rod drills as the original intent, was the same pump design that they used on the 215, right? Which had a 2.3-inch main, right? So you're talking like what, 3/4 of an inch more main diameter, and it's still relying on the same damn pump. Get out of town. I mean, that's per main.
Yeah.
Right? If you add all that up, that's 5 mains at 3/4 of an inch. I mean, what is that? 4? I don't know. Math in public. I'm an idiot. Why did I do that? Okay, so it's yeah, like
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's like 3.9 inches or something extra.
Yeah.
that stock already meager 215 pump has to handle.
Yeah.
So I just buy the high volume pumps for any of the small blocks. I do every single one of them gets a high volume pump. But if you've ever looked at any of the pumps for the Buick, the high volume small block pump is the stock 455 pump with the shaft is shorter. That's it. Yeah. That's it. But what I have noticed is that a Chevrolet small block aftermarket milling pump, they have a new one now called the Shark's Tooth, right? Mm-hmm. And they were touting it on, where did I see it? Maybe the PRI magazine, maybe. And so I called them. I said, hey, man, can you get those gears and press them on a Buick shaft? And they're like, yeah, it'd be pretty easy because it started off as a Buick pump, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what I thought. But it has like these aggressive-looking teeth on these gears that hold more oil. And I thought, man, that would be really cool.
Hey, there's a question here. Colleen Tebow just asked.
Okay, what time?
Shane, it's at the very.
Okay, I see it. Gotcha.
Yep.
All right.
Shane, what makes Damien's block a 360 Magnum versus a standard one? The difference is that Magnums have no oiling that go up to the heads. They oil through the actual lifters. Now, you can possibly use an that's the main difference is, and also to the shaft rockers. You know, they oil up through the heads on a standard head. So that way they can use the shaft rockers, and that's how they oil through them. Now, Magnum's oil, like I said, up through the lifters. I've seen people get away with, I personally have never done it, but they'll use a Magnum block and they'll put an LA head on it, and then they'll use like an AMC style lifter, which oils up through the actual lifter. Now you can run the hydraulic lifter on the Magnum, and it's going to oil up. But as far as getting enough oil up there to support a shaft rocker, that's where I've always questioned it. I'm not sure if that's going to work or not. Now you can, I do know people who have taken a takeoff in the back where the oil pressure setting unit's at, and they've run a line so they can tee into the head with like an external oiling system, and then it goes into the shaft. But it's a pain in the butt. It's definitely not worth it. But that's what basically makes the difference. If you look at the block, if you send me a picture of the block, you'll see where the oiling hole goes up. I believe on the driver's side, it's going to be
you can do that a lot easier. There's
What's
a lot
that?
easier. Isn't that 360 Magnum? Is the block drilled just like the original 360 for the oil to come up through the head?
No, not
It's
on
not
all
at
of
all?
them. some early ones did, like the very early ones did have that, like the ones that were not considered the Magnum,
Right.
And then the very first like renditions of them when they were using leftover blocks, but basically the Magnums had they still had the same casting, but the hole wasn't drilled, so you could drill a hole.
That's what I figured is like the tooling is usually similar, right? So you should be able to. Okay,
but it's a pain in the ass, dude. And that's a long hole.
And if you get it off by like just a fraction of a degree, it's off by a half of an inch down at the end. That's where drilling it out of the machine shop is probably an ideal situation.
Yeah.
But that's what I was wondering, because sometimes they don't change the tooling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Buicks went from oil through the head to oil through the push rod in 1970. All of them did, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they had the holes in the block all the way up through but they only did it on the 455 on like one side. The 350s they still had it all the way through the end of the run.
Yeah.
But the head just didn't have it. It would just be capped off at the head, really, right?
Colleen, have them take a picture of the actual block surface where the pistons are, right between the number 1 and 3, and then I believe it's number 6 and 8. There should be. I'm looking for holes in the block. There'll be a little casting up at the very top, and that'll be where the oil goes through. Some of them had it, and some of them don't. And if you don't want to use that one, I think there's a 360 out there that is a non-Magnum one. I mean, you're welcome to have it. I don't know. I'll have to look after this, but the Magnum is a better block. It's a better engine all the way around. As far as finding heads for them, it's just a Magnum head. They were really plentiful for the longest time, so I don't know exactly what's going on.
Well, and it's not hard. Like you could actually put LA 360 heads on that thing, and I know that they're oil through the head and all that. But if it's not fitted for it on the block, it won't really matter. What you can do then is you create a oil through the push rod conversion. You can do it yourself. It's actually pretty easy.
No, it's really, you just change the lifters and the push rods. But the thing is, with the shaft mount rocker, the way because that's a ball and cup, it's not a ball and ball. You see, it's saying it's at the push rod, so it's not designed for that. So you'd have to change a lot of things, and then usually the rocker arms are not designed to have high pressure oil going up the push rod through the rocker in that direction. They're designed to go the opposite direction. So there's no provisions to put oil back to the tip.
Which side has the cup? The push rod or the lifter? Or the rocker arm?
The rocker arm side.
Has
a cup. And what it's designed to do is that oil leaks into that cup and it catches it, and then the ball is in the rocker. And the problem is that if you change it the other way around, there's no way for oil to get the other way. You follow me?
That's exactly how I did my my super stock motor.
Yeah,
that's exactly how I did it, because I pushed oil up through the lift or through the push rod into the rocker arm.
Yeah, but see, there's no high pressure. You would have to cut a groove on the inside of the rocker, then drill a hole through the rocker.
Oh, there's no oil passage in that rocker?
It's a tiny one, but it's designed to drip out. It's an external drip into a cup. So it's kind of like a Slant 6 deal. There's nothing. So basically, where it sits at, it's just designed to leak oil into it. So if you were to flip it the other way and you had a cup here, that oil is going to go into a cup. Well, the oil needs to go over here. The oil needs to go over here, not here. So there's nowhere for it to go. So you'd have to.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So the Buick actually has the holes line up.
Yeah. It's not like that.
Okay, yeah, I looked at it. I'm like, man, it was pretty easy for me to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's another way too. I mean, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You could probably drill down the block and then run an external line internally inside the oil.
Oh yeah, you could using that copper tube like you use for oil pressure gauge.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And then all you need is like a manifold for them all, and then literally just a couple of those lines for every single individual. Actually, I would just run it and let it drizzle on the shaft, because then it'll run down the rockers anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you could actually even pick it up from the tower that comes up for the oil pressure gauge, because the number 5 main on a Chrysler gets literally, it's a 1/2 inch oil goes to it, right? So that little tower there is where I pick up all my oil at that I feed off to the rest of the block, because it's coming right off the filter, and it's got a ton of fluid going right there.
Huh.
So yeah,
there you go. Here's Dust Devil saying, here's how you fix that. Harlan Sharp makes a set of rockers for shaft mount on a Magnum.
There you go. Perfect. Oh, here, I got the picture. See here.
Huh. I didn't know there was such a thing, but I don't see why there wouldn't be.
All right, Colin Tebow, this might be it. See, if you look right here, we're going to go John Wilburn here. See that hole right there? Does that hole go all the way down? Right there. Does that hole go all the way down to the camshaft, and put a get a coat hanger, and then just open it up and go through there and make sure that groove, that hole goes through, because on the Magnums they'll have that cam where it blocks it off, so that way it doesn't go through. So this is, if that hole goes through, this is an early Magnum, so you can run either type of head on this block, but you got to make sure that the cam bearing is designed for that.
Which generally means you need to change that cam bearing for that earlier application.
Yeah. Or what I normally do is I'll just punch a hole through it. I'll just run a drill bit through there, and I'll just go slowly through the bearing, clean it up, and then when I run my cam, I just put a full groove on the cam, and then I tap the block for a restrictor. Anyways, that's what I have done on my block, on my race car. I put a full groove on it, so that way it puts high pressure there constantly. And then I just close down the orifice on it down to a 109 or something. I think this one's 90,000. I'm not sure. I forgot. So just to keep the pressure high.
Let's see here. All right. Colleen says she's got cleaning brushes.
Yeah.
So.
You got to put something small down there just to make sure that it punches through into the cam bearing.
Yeah, for stuff like that, I like to use dowels. I have like wooden and metal dowels for almost all that crap.
Really?
If you want to follow it and see where it comes out, right? It's so easy to assume that it's coming out here, and you just put your metal dowel in there. Because generally, all the passages in the blocks are generally drilled with a drill bit that's straight, right? I mean, you can't drill it with a wonky shaped drill bit, a U-shaped drill bit, right? Mm-hmm. So all of the stuff is straight. You just need to figure out where the other hole is at and what angle they drilled it at. That's the big one. So, I feel all kinds of crap with. I'm Mr. Set Screw. Right?
Me too.
I will wipe out the set screw section at the Hillard. Is it Hillard? Hillman. Yeah. The small bolt and nut section at the local hardware store, the Hillman. Yeah. I will freaking wipe that thing out with all the set screws. Everybody will go in there like, where the hell is all the set screws? And even the fine ones, I'll take the fine thread stuff if there's nothing left.
Yeah, I actually prefer the fine thread ones because you don't have to cut into the block nearly as much.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
Michael
that.
Roberts asked a question here, and I'm going to address on that. That's a good question. Would need a high-volume oil pump to satisfy these oiling mods? No. And the reason being is because all you're doing is doing the exact same type of oiling. As long as your clearances are correct, you just don't throw one of these engines together. But if you're doing these oiling mods, all you're doing is you're feeding the same amount of oil to different spots. And instead of feeding it from one direction, you're feeding the same place, but with 4 different ways. So that way it equalizes pressure. You don't have a high volume. You don't have a high velocity in one section. It slows the velocity down to everything. So even amount of oil is being pumped throughout the engine at any given time through everything. So no, you don't. Actually, more than likely, because you're feeding it and the velocity is lower, you can get away with a stock pump. Or even a regular style pump. And on my Slant 6s, everything's opened up massively. And I'm back feeding oiling everywhere in that thing. And it's running a factory aluminum pump in it that I just rebuilt from like an eBay type of, an Amazon type of little rebuild kit. And it runs at 55 pounds of oil pressure because you don't need any more than a Slant 6. And yeah, so I don't ever do that. In fact, on one of my videos, I have the same oil pump that I've been running for 22 years in my race car. All I do is I pull it back apart, I inspect it, and put it right back in.
So I kind of somewhat agree a little bit.
Sure.
Because it
Depends on what engine. Now, it depends on what engine.
And it depends how weak the pump is to begin with. Okay, like
Yes.
like how much volume it is capable of flowing. And I ran into this when I didn't do a high volume pump on a Buick small block, and I did all the oiling mods. I knew it was going to save a bunch of power having the minimal amount of oil pump that it needed. Okay, so I'm like, all right, well, I started off with a stock one, and here is the indicator. Okay, so generally what you're doing is when you increase the passages and all this stuff, your oil pump normally has a pressure spring in it that's set at a certain pressure, usually like 60 pounds. And on a stock engine, with the stock passages and all that stuff, it'll achieve that 60 pounds virtually at startup, because you got to remember, it's fighting every twist and turn and misaligned hole and a casting flash and all that stuff.
It's drag.
Right. And that builds your 60 pounds of oil pressure. So, that and I guess it'd be considered like the standard issue losses that you're going to have around the tolerances of the bearings, the lifters, all that stuff, right? That stuff's already accounted for from the manufacturer of the engine. Now, what I found is when you open up all those passages, your oil pressure is going to remain the same, because that spring is the regulating spring, and it's still going to open at 60 pounds, okay? But the volume of oil is immensely increased, right?
Correct, because it's not going to hit the 60 pounds as fast.
And as your volume is increased, the leverage it's going to have on that pressure spring, okay? Because normally when you start your car, it was totally stock. It's up as soon as you start it, that pump is up against the pressure spring. It's already pushing that pressure spring open, and it's dumping excess oil back through the pump. Because what it does is it doesn't dump it back in the pan usually. Usually it dumps it right back into the intake side of the pump.
Yeah, just,
right?
Yeah, just cavitates.
Circulates,
Yeah,
right?
Circulates it, yeah.
And what you'll find is when you open all that up, that spring is not moving hardly at all. And what I found was when I opened all up and I had too little of a pump, when I started it up, everything was okay. It was copacetic when I started up. When I started building some heat, right, and the oil pressure started going down because the oil was thinner, and it got, let's say it was like at 30 pounds or whatever, you'd see these sporadic jumps on the oil pressure gauge. And that's because what's happening is you have such a large volume that you're demanding from the pump. When that spring opens, it'll bleed off 3 drops, okay? But that 3 drops is detrimental to the size of the volume you're flowing, and it will lose oil pressure so fast. It'll dip like this and just keep dipping, and it'll be up against that spring. And that's how you know you're riding the edge of where it is inefficient. You're not going to have enough oil, especially if you got it wound up. I mean, it might be a little bit better, but if it ever opened that bypass, you might be starving for oil for a little while, right?
Yeah, and maybe I should have said that. Yes, on a Buick, yes, probably. On most of my 360s and my Mopars, they got a really good pump oiling system right off the bat as far as the pump goes. There's really not any need for it. In fact, I actually take some spring out of them. I think they're a little overpressured once you get everything opened up.
Usually.
You're usually good.
Yeah. And like once you get... you're really fighting for every horsepower when you're cutting springs or shimming springs. That's when that's when you know you're fighting for every stinking horsepower you could possibly get. And that is the most tedious
pain in the
thing
ass.
You can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I like the Buick being external. It's like, I can pop the spring out in a matter of seconds, cut a coil off, put it back in, and see what happens. But, if you're not AMC guy or Buick guy,
or big block Mopar guy,
or big block Mopar, you're sucking. You're like, oh damn, it's got too much spring in it. I'm not gonna pull the motor out and take the pan off and all that stuff.
That's why once I got this oil pump right, that's why I didn't change anything, because it works so well. I was like, I'm not gonna touch it. It works awesome.
Yeah. Let's see. Riff Raff Rackus says, what is a good cam option for a Pontiac 430 over with stock heads? What's the purpose of the engine, buddy?
Yes, exactly. And what's the RPM range? What are you going to do? Is it automatic? Is it stick shift? Is it a cruiser? Are you looking for sound? I mean, what exactly?
Yeah, that's the correct way to narrow down a camshaft. Is you need to know the purpose of the engine first and foremost.
Agreed.
Okay, so Doug Narden says, when running an oil cooler, does it matter if it's before or after the filter?
I run mine after. I run through the filter first. So that way you're not putting any crap through the filter, through the cooler. And that's the way it's going to be done on my Gen 3 Hemi.
Oh, it goes through the filter first? Mm-hmm. I think that, I've never owned anything I could put a freaking remote oil filter or oil cooler on. Like I hate to say it, the Buicks were the cooling system or the oiling system was so meager, you didn't freaking screw with them, right? Like,
yeah.
You don't add anything extra because it's like another point of failure.
Yeah. Well, the road race car, I'm gonna need it.
I'm sure it's going to be mandatory on that
yeah,
sucker.
It's mandatory. Yeah. So it's going to have twin filters on it, and then it's going to go to a cooler. And in that car, I did put a high volume pump on it just because it's going to have. I mean, if you see the oiling system on that car, it might as well be a dry sump, but it's it's still got a pump in the front.
Yeah. So Riff Raff is saying 4-speed, street car, 373 rear gears. What are you going to be using it for? That's the big one. That's the one we got to know. Because most of that stuff you can kind of get away with, but as an assumption, but you got to know what's the purpose, what you're shooting for.
Yeah. I'm actually going to tell him a cam number here real quick.
And see here, Irish Outlaw Garage is kind of on it. He's saying Pontiac is not a high rever.
That's right.
Torque is your best friend, right? And they're all big stroke engines when you're talking about Pontiacs pretty much.
Yeah. On those, I'm trying to remember the cam number. I think it was like is it a 250 or something? Or I see it. My computer's worthless right now, and I have all my notes in here, and I can't even look it up. So, you know what? Send it to slantdailygarage@yahoo.com, and I'll get to it. And I'll actually send you the link to the camshaft that you need. And it works beautiful.
So Tom Brown saying, Dallas, do you know how the adjustable spring setup from TA works, and how would you adjust one at idle, under load, cold or hot? Well, I actually have one on the Suburban, and all it's doing is it's actually on the front where you normally have your cap for the spring. That's where I normally put shims. I just use some washers. I put washers in there, and you put the spring in, and right, and all you're doing is preloading that spring a little bit more. In their case, they just have there's a foot in there, and it's threaded. It has a threaded rod, and it just pushes against that spring all the time. So it cannot fix your oil pressure at idle, really, right? Just like your oil pressure at idle is generally what your oil pressure is going to be. And for a Buick, they say if it has anything on the gauge and it's not clattering, you're okay. That's the rule of thumb, especially race engines. Now, if you rev it up, it should pick right up and go up to, like, say, 50 or 60 pounds. And how would you adjust one? At idle, under load, cold or hot? So I would adjust one. I would have it completely backed all the way off. And then what I would do is I would bring it up to, like, say, 1,500 RPM. Whatever the service instructions were for the Buick, I want to say it was like 1,500 RPM. You had to bring the engine up to, like, 1,500 RPM and to where that's where it's checking your actual oil pressure, your regulated oil pressure. And you want to do it hot. You want to do it with the engine warmed up, and you would bring it up to, like, say, 1,500 RPMs, and then you would adjust that adjustable screw at the front of the oil pressure regulator. You just want to keep turning it in until you achieve the oil pressure that you want. Remember, at idle, it's not really going to be able to do anything. That's not how it works, right? It's regulating the oil pressure, and that's the maximum, right?
Yeah.
To have really good oil pressure at idle, you need tight tolerances on bearings, and that's usually what the big thing is, and that pump. If you have low oil pressure at idle on a Buick, the first thing to look at is actually you buy a booster plate. The cheapy booster plate from Melling, I think they're $23 or something. you buy that booster plate, and then what I do is I would like the booster plates are actually almost perfectly smooth on the bottom. And then what I'll do is I will play with tolerance until I get to that thing within 2 to 3 thousandths of the face of the gear. Okay, and I will just screw with it and screw with it and screw with it. I'll shim it, gaskets, whatever. I got like 200 oil pump gaskets, and I go through every single one and measure them with a freaking caliper so I know how thick each one is. And then you're trying to set the end tolerance on that thing to 2 to 3 thousandths, and that would generally do a lot for you for oil pressure.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Fabrice Mod repeats saying run oil through filter, then cooler.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
So Riff Raff is saying it's a semi-daily driver. All right.
Yeah, I don't have any. I would give you the cam number, but it's in the it's like 218 or 217 duration at 50. It's a really mild cam. That's for like a daily driver. If you want something a little bit more boogity, I believe it's in the 220 something duration at 50 on the intake. All of them are on a 110 to 112 LSA. But if you send it, if you send it to my Slant Daily Garage yahoo.com, I'll send you a link to the exact camshaft that you need.
Okay, so Twisted Mopar Garage has a pretty decent question. My question is, if you worry about oil temperature, doesn't more filters add to more heat over time, engine run time while racing on long term? That's if you have multiple filters, right?
Yeah, I mean, eventually you're basically just going to take longer to get to the same temperature, eventually.
It would heat soak. Yeah, it eventually
it's just going to heat soak. But then, as far as the filters for is because I am road racing it, I'm going to have 2 smaller filters on it that are, two large filters on it. So that way the oil going through the medium, there's under less pressure. That's the whole point of it. And they're not going to be in series. They're going to be in parallel. So the oil going into them. Yeah. So
so be half the resistance through it.
It's half the resistance. Yes. So that's the reason for it. And then it goes through the cooler.
Yeah, so 38 POS Racing says oil filter first, then cooler, hot oil filters easier, which is, I didn't think of it like that, but that's 100% true.
Yeah, well, that's.
Okay, so Ed's Machine is saying that 218 by 224 at 450 and 460 lift.
For what?
That's that cam, I think that you were asking about, you were talking about, right?
Oh, for the Pontiac?
Yes, for the Pontiac.
Oh, yeah, he's right there. That's about the number. Yeah, 218, 224. That would be for the smaller one. I believe the other one's like 222 or 2 something like that on the intake for the little larger one. And I don't care about lift. Lift is meaningless, basically, unless you know head flow. Duration of 50 and then lobe separation angle. So it'd be about a 110 or 112 LSA, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. But yeah, that sounds about right.
So Clayton's Toolbox is saying, what is the minimum piston quench height? I have 30 thousandths, think that's too tight.
What's your piston rock? That's the one thing you really have to check, because if it's a 0 deck head, like on my car, I have a 0 deck, right? But because I have, 10 thousandths of piston rock, I couldn't have 30 thousandths. I had to go to a 40 thousandths gasket for that, because when you start it up, you're going to have things get too close. 30 thousandths is about right, but you have to measure in the piston rock also.
And I think we've talked about this before when we were talking quench, right? Yep. And it was it Weir Morrison that was saying if the piston is not leaving a dusted mark on a witness mark on the cylinder head, it's you're leaving power on the table.
Yeah,
right?
But that's for racing stuff. I'm pretty sure that he's talking about driver stuff. 30 thousandths is about the minimum I would go for.
I'd try to get 40. Yeah, I'd try to get 40 on it. But he's right. It all depends upon piston rock, and then when you start getting them that tight, make sure if you're using big time camshaft stuff, you're looking at freaking piston to valve clearance on those.
Yeah. I'm actually going to be doing a video exactly how to check that piston valve clearance without using clay, the actual correct way, so you can do it on the valve drop method. That's going to be my next video. I've already filmed it. I'm actually just doing the editing right now.
Well, you can technically do that probably with a dial indicator, right?
Yeah, that's exactly
Just by pulling all the way up, set it at 0, and then drop it, and then.
Well,
I guess you'd have to get the piston close as you possibly can.
You put the camshaft in, you put the rockers on, right?
Uh-huh.
So then you take the 0 lash out of it, and you put setup springs on it. So then what you do is after it's been degreed, and 10 is about on the exhaust side before is about where it's going to be. So I do it every 2 degrees. So I'll go I'll go 18, then I'll go 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, and that way I can get a map. I can actually watch it get tighter and then fall away. And then I'll do the same thing on the intake side, somewhere usually right around 10 or 11. And then I'll do the exact same thing. I'll start at like 8, like 4, and then this way I can actually get a map. And where you're going to have the most piston and valve problems usually it's going to be on the exhaust side, because the camshaft mechanically is pushing the valve open. It's chasing the piston down. The problem is on the exhaust side, you're on spring. The only thing pulling that valve away from that piston is the spring pressure. So there's nothing mechanical. It's just whatever's left over on the spring energy. 9 times out of 10, that's where your piston and valve problems are going to happen. That's the reason why they always want a little bit more, space on there. Also, too, because it's the exhaust is going to get bigger. But that's why I always check the exhaust first and make sure that my spring pressures on my exhaust are a little heavier on a race engine when it's closing, because that way I have a little bit more, safety margin there. So
Tom Brown saying that his 350, I'm assuming is a Buick, has 68 pounds at idle with 1030 with the pump blueprint and with the booster plate. And if that's hot, you're doing really well, my friend. But when you start opening up those passages, it won't look like that anymore. I promise. It won't be 68 pounds. It'll be, especially at idle. I noticed they're all around about 20 to 25. When I got them right, that's about where they fall at, 20 to 25. Dakota's saying, Dallas, did you see my comment of doing a thumbnail of Easy Rider with your faces on? I'll have to do it. I think it would be cool. Yeah, but it's got to be. That's the thing, is if there's a zillion thumbnail ideas for the show, but it has to be car related. That's the big one. I mean, I don't want to get too far away from what we're really all about on here. So
it's still mechanical, still car stuff. I mean, that's it.
No. I'm fine with the bike. That's cool. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, mostly old parts. Ron jumped in here, and it jumped as soon as I freaking clicked on it. Hi, Dallas. Hi, Shane. Rain, thunder, lightning, and 50, 70 mile an hour winds, I'm assuming. Nothing special, just typical Kansas spring weather. Nice. Sounds like a walk in the park.
Yeah. It seems like every Wednesday, except for this Wednesday. It's beautiful outside.
Yeah, it's gorgeous here, man. It was like 83 degrees here today.
Yeah.
I think we're heading right for the 90s.
That's gonna be nice. I want some heat, finally.
It's too much. 80 something, because the humidity will come in and it'll be like, ugh. I'm waiting for that, like September. I'll deal with it. Let's see. James Show has showed up here, shaking out everybody's cobwebs out of their brain. Let's see. Most of the old parts. Shane, good subject on the piston to valve clearance. How do you account for additional clearance on engines that use a launcher profile camshaft like those found on stock eliminator engines?
Coil bind. That's your limiting factor. So basically what we do is we would set it up so that way your coil bind is your max lift. Now, obviously there comes a point where once you're launching it, it's just basically, and the RPM's so high that it goes out of control. Yes, fully understand that, but there's an inherent risk when you're doing this kind of camshaft. But usually we're using coil bind as the limiting factor as far as max lift. And that's usually right around 550. We don't go crazy with that kind of stuff. I think 425, I think, is some of those, or 409, I think is the max lift allowed. And I think we're only getting up to, like, say, 550 lift. But remember that where you're going to have piston and valve clearances when the valve is actually on its way, the exhaust is closing and the intake's opening. So really it's only going to be on the exhaust side. So, and on a lot of those, we're not launching them nearly as hard on the exhaust. We're changing a little bit on the duration because I think it's just a lift rule, so we can change the duration a lot on that one. But we use spring pressure for spring coil bind for your limiting factor.
Huh. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I had never thought of it like that. Mm-hmm. So James is letting us know that he has the single-digit oil pressure numbers at idle when hot on Rusty the Nova. So I don't know if that's good or bad. If it's Chevrolet small block, that's probably pretty bad. I remember them being pretty good on oil pressure. But maybe you got her opened up so you can gain yourself that 25, 30 extra horsepower. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that there's that kind of power in that pump being, because it is a parasitic turd, right? Yeah. And if it's not right, guess what? You lose a whole bunch. Okay, so Riff Raff Rackus says, I have a 70 Riviera complete engine, and it's advantageous to bolt the 70 heads on a 76 455 block for the improved oil system and stronger block. Yes, and a smaller chamber head. That 76 probably has like a 76cc chamber head, and your 70 head is a 67cc chamber. You're going to go from, now that 70 engine would be like 10 1/4 to 1 compression, and that 76 would be like 7.6, but you might end up somewhere around about 9.2, 9 to 1, somewhere around there on that 76 engine. That's my trick. See, my favorite cylinder head for the Buick is a 71 head. It actually has a bigger chamber than the 70, the 67 through 70 head, and it's actually I think it's a 71 or 72 cc chamber head. But it's the magic head because you can take a 10 1/4 to 1 455. The problem with the 10 1/4 one is you got to run race gas if you want to drive the damn thing on the street.
Yeah.
And I will take the 71 head and throw it on that, and it'll make it 9.2. Or you can take that 71 head and put it on your 76 blocks, and it'll make it 9.2. Mm-hmm. It's the perfect head. So and it has hardened valve seats, so you can't beat it. All right, so let's see. Doug Narn says he's got to go to work. Have a good night. See you Wednesday night. Dougster is out. Let's see. Later, Doug. Get some Z's, man. Mostly old parts and rust. Professor P, if you were buying a small block Mopar oil pump today, which one would you buy? Standard output, of course.
Yes, it'd be standard output. Well, it really depends on what we're doing, and but it would be a standard output. And that's actually what's on that engine right there. That's in there. I would find one that says USA on it. Do they even make those? Or does Melling even have?
Melling makes stuff now still. Yeah.
Is it still in USA?
As far as I know, it's still in Michigan.
Then get a Melling oil pump. Make sure it says USA on it. That's basically what I have an extra one that I just keep just in case that I blueprinted and everything myself. But I've never really used it. It just basically stays constantly in WD-40.
Well, and that's what I guess maybe we should probably talk about blueprinting an oil pump, because most people have probably never even considered or thought of it. Because I know, especially the ones like a Ford has a cast iron housing.
Mm-hmm. Same with Chrysler.
Does it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take the output of that, where the oil is being fed from the pump to the block.
Yep. Massively huge.
And what you do is you massively huge, and then you polish the crap out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And take all the sharp corners out of it and everything.
Yep. You radius all the edges and turns so that there's nothing impeding the flow, right? Radiusing the turns probably is one of the biggest things you can do, because when they come to a 90-degree turn,
you lose a pound. Every turn, I think it's a pound or so, pressure.
Well, and I was telling you guys that the Buick is poor on oiling. There is 9 90-degree turns from the time it's picked up at the pickup in the pan.
Oh my God!
Until it's 90 degrees. One of them is greater than 90 degrees. One of them is almost 180. Until it actually gets to the number one main galley, or the main galley.
Wow.
So
I polish everything, and I make it so that way it's like a mirror image.
Yeah.
And then all the corners are radiused, and then on a Chrysler, where it goes into the main cap. I polish all that. Everything's opened up, and then it kind of comes in at an angle like this, and then turns, and then it makes a 90. And so I punch out that plug there, and I cut down all that, and everything's opened up to a 1/2 inch, so it's much bigger. And then where it comes to the on a small block, they have the filter bolts to the side of the block, but then there's a plate that bolts to that. And on the side of that block, I take that plate off, and then there's like a little piece there, and I grind all that down so that way it's fish mouth. So it's it comes into
the opening's huge. Yeah,
opening's huge, and it's smooth. So that way it's designed to kind of come in and then circulate around. Where now I take that piece off, and then I radius it so that way it's all the way around. And then I add. There's only 4 holes that come in those, so I add 4 more holes to that. And then the biggest thing is that you can do all this, but the one thing that no one ever looks at is the piece that holds the filter on. I take that piece and I drill that out to a 1/2 inch and smooth and polish that, because that thing's only I forget what that I think it comes 7/16. So you can do all this oiling mods, but then you're feeding the oil back into the block through a 7/16 hole. Right. That where it screws onto. So I open that up. So, and I've got a few of those things, because the first couple ones you're going to break because it's hardened steel. So to drill that through is kind of a pain in the ass. But basically, I go through and I polish everything, and especially on the pump too. And then I cut off all the sharp corners, and then I measure everything with not a caliper, but actual dial indicators. And then so that way I can get my heights correct. And then I use wet sandpaper on a granite stone to square up everything, and that's how I set the depth of my gears that go inside the pump, and before I put the top on, so that way I can get all the depths correct. So that way you're not going to just be bypassing oil. It's the correct,
Right. You want to get the gear. You need to get the gears within the face tolerance. Like I said, 2 to 3 thousandths on the Buick. I'm sure it's exactly the same on everything else, because the closer you get those gears,
yep,
the less it bleeds out right there. Right. And that's where that's creating the pressure at. So if it's constantly bleeding into the other orifices inside the pump, you're never going to have great oil pressure.
Yeah.
Let's see. The other thing is, every time there's a transition from the small block Ford, it goes from I want to say it's probably a 7/16 hole out. Okay. So I would open that sucker up. It'd probably be 1/2 inch to 9/16. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's bigger the better.
And it would be ported, right? Like ported big time, and then polished to a mirror finish, just like he's saying. The hole going into the block would be roughly the same size. Whatever, if I did 9/16 coming out of the pump, it'd be 9/16. But what I would do is I would chamfer that first, 1/8 of an inch of that hole where it'd be 5/8. And that way there is no step transition between the two. It's actually going into a void that's larger and then next down to the same size. So it doesn't lose anything at that transitional phase, even if you get the pump just slightly misaligned. Right? Because there is no dowel in there, and you don't want to put a dowel in there, because what's going to happen when you put a dowel in there? It's going to restrict oil flow, right? Just remember, the smallest passage that you have in an oil system is how much oil the entire system is going to get.
Yeah. There's something going on in the chats, because I can only read some of it, but if you're running race bearing clearances, then yes, you're going to need a high volume pump. That's the whole thing. But if this is something that you're driving on the street, you don't need a high volume pump or high pressure. You just need a standard pump. Personally, in my race engine, I'm only using a standard pump. I don't have a high volume in that engine, because I just don't need it, because I've ran this one for so long, and it stays right at 70 pounds of oil pressure wherever I go at any RPM. So that's what I'm looking at. So for me, it just seems to work. But for most people, if you're running race bearing clearances, which is like 3 thousandths or 2.5 on, something that's a 2-inch journal, you're running 2.5 or 3 thousandths on mains. Yeah, get a high volume, because you're going to need that extra volume to move it through there. But not everything. If you're driving on the street, you don't need a high volume pump. That's just my opinion. And I've built hundreds and hundreds of engines, and
But you also don't have 3 thousandths main or bearing clearance on the on a street driven engine.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the race engines are looser, the better, generally.
Right.
Now it just does get to a point that's ridiculous, but you generally run it on the maximum allowable tolerance for the bearings. That way there is no friction. That's the whole point. So,
yeah.
And then I think Tony was telling me it's like for top fuel stuff they were running 5,000 clearance. 5,000.
I could see that. Well, yeah, but look at that oil. You see how thick that oil is?
Oh yeah, and that's because at the end of the run it's super thin, right?
And they're running aluminum blocks, and it's a whole different animal, because they're using the oil as a cushion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. That's because the aluminum rods and all the stuff in it, right? So
yeah. And aluminum rods, that's a whole different animal too. When you set it up for like piston clearances, head clearances, quench area, whatever. That's a whole different deal. I've done a few of those engines, man. It's a whole different deal.
Well, I do like my oil and mods. I got
Yeah.
I don't know how many videos of that on Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood, and I haven't done a Mr. Rodder's Neighborhood. It probably won't be a while till I get one out, but I'll probably do one when I do this carb swap on this truck, because unfortunately I'm not going to have any numbers to compare it to, but I am going to see what it's going to do, and maybe I'll just drive it so I can get a comparison on it. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe.
There was actually a comment that someone, it's been coming up in my things lately, is we kind of missed over the hardcore talk for a while, but there was one thing that I've noticed that a lot of people have been, especially on YouTube, and we did this talk about 6 months ago, but people are stabbing distributors and they're always seeming to be 180 out. Have you noticed that? There's a lot of them.
Maybe I should do a short on how to not do that.
What's that?
Maybe I should do a short on how not to do that.
Exactly. And so here's the thing is that I always explain to people, what's the first stroke in a 4-stroke cycle? It's intake. So if you line up the dots and you stab the distributor, you're going to be 180 out because the crankshaft has to make 360 degrees. The cam has to go 180 degrees before it's at the compression stroke on number 1. So if you line up the dots, you have to give the crankshaft one full rotation so both dots are pointing up, then stab the distributor, and you will not be 180 out. That's for Chevrolets and Chryslers. Fords, I believe it's the same thing, but I don't speak Ford, so but I know for 100% fact.
The cheapest way I do it.
Yeah.
I am Mr. Cheater. I try to cut every possible corner I can when it comes to shit, especially if it's something that's time consuming, right? Because a distributor, when I was a young kid, man, I had one feed me for days, and it was like, what the hell? And I made a huge mistake of just lining up, 0. We're going to go to 0 and drop it in, and it would not run, backfiring, popping, farting, the whole 9 yards. What is going on? Well, let me pull the distributor out. I'll turn it over, right? Mm-hmm. Turn it over. Probably not paying attention. Get it around twice. I don't know. Whatever. Not running. And then this guy showed me this trick, and I have yet to see it fail on me. You get a piece of paper towel, right? Tear the corner off of it. Wad it up in a little ball like this. Shove that sucker in the spark plug hole. Make sure it's bigger than the spark plug hole, right?
Yeah.
When you wad it up. Turn it over, and when it pops out, and it will pop, it'll probably scare you because it sounds like a freaking, like those snap, crackle, pop things from 4th of July that you throw on the ground. Mm-hmm. It sounds like one of those. It's like pop, and it'll shoot that thing across the room, right? But now you're up on top dead center, and it's like you can't F it up anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I do it.
Yeah, but see, I'm mostly doing this when the heads are off.
Oh yeah, I don't put distributor in when the heads are off.
Yeah, and then that's a good way to do it. And so most people, when they're putting the cam in, and they're doing that, they haven't really put the maybe they put the intake. Well, see, on a Chrysler, I can do all that stuff with the heads off. Yeah, on a Chevrolet, yeah, I guess, yeah. There's actually, I saw something go through here. Big Belly Racing, he called me, and you're correct. I can't call Canada. I told him I'd call him back. I didn't know he was in Canada, and it's like, you can't make this phone call for whatever reason. I don't know. I have Verizon.
Are the restrictions literally shutting it off at the border? You can't even make a phone call now?
I couldn't make a phone call to Canada. So he called me, and I was like, "Oh, hey, no problem, man. I'll call you back. I'm right in the middle of something. I was in a meeting, right? This was on what day was that? It was Monday night, right? So then I get out of the thing and I hit redial. I was like, oh, there it is right there, and I hit redial because I told him I'd call him back on my way home, and it bit doo doo doo. You cannot make this phone call. Cannot call internationally to Canada. It was like, that's odd. Never had that before. So yeah. So yes, you're correct.
I never figured that would be like
a thing. I never even thought of it. Yeah. So
I don't know. I want to go up there one day. I do, and it's closest. That's like. Here's what's sad. I don't know how many countries I've been to now.
Yeah.
A zillion. Is there a zillion? Is that the only continent I haven't been to is Antarctica, right? So that gives you an idea. But I've never been to Canada. Never been. Well, just like the United States. I went to like 7 states, but I'd already been to like 35 countries.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been to Vancouver a few times.
Oh, best strip clubs in the world.
Really? I was a kid when I was there.
Dude, okay. No, for most of the ones everybody's going to see, yes. Vancouver, best strip clubs in the world. For sailors, Guam. Guam's the best place to see it for strip clubs.
I figured it would have been like Thailand.
No. Thailand's the sex shows. Crazy stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, crazy stuff, man.
It's like a male Disneyland is what I heard it's like.
Yeah, if you want to go, man, I can set you up. But I got it all figured out. I'm telling you, man, I was really good at being a sailor, and I got all the good sailor stuff figured out.
Yeah, my father-in-law, he was a sailor. You know, he did 30 years or something like that as a cook, and he told me all the stories. Yeah. Yep.
So my next project says, "Come on up, I'll take you to our local track." Maybe that might be worth it, man.
Yeah,
I am going up to the track in Michigan. I got, we got Sloan's Onondaga Dragway in Michigan, in Onondaga, Michigan, and we got 2 events up there in June, like one at the beginning of June, one at the end of June. Mm-hmm. And the idea was I was going to take my travel trailer up there and then stay for 2 weeks and take my kids on a vacation, and we were going to go gold mining on the shores of the Lake Superior.
Dude, that's awesome. That sounds like. I've done some of that panning for gold. I went up into the high desert when I was still in California.
Oh yeah.
And I went up and got a couple of those little buckets, and I actually found some gold dust. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's. Yeah. I was watching it. See, I love watching the gold mining shows. They're
me too. I'm an idiot too.
Yeah. And here I am yelling at the TV, "No, Parker, don't do that stupid crap." But it's like, and I've never freaking mined for anything in my life. But I thought it would be kind of cool to go up there and do some gold mining, because I saw on YouTube there's a guy that it's like a DIY gold miner, and he lived by Lake Superior, and apparently Lake Superior has really good gold in the sand around it. Really? And I have a small sluice box that's made out of like a piece of PVC pipe that's 4 inches wide and has a sluice and mats and the whole 9 yards. And I figured I'll go up there, I'll get some gold concentrate, right from your pay dirt right to concentrate, and then I'll run it down the sluice and see if we find anything. And if I find 2 flakes, it'll totally be worth every freaking minute I've been there. Yeah.
I carried that pan on my back when I went backpacking in the Boy Scouts. Just so when we got into these little areas, I would look for where there was a waterfall, and I'd go over there and I would get some of the sand, and I put it in there, and I'd go over to the water, and I'm over there. Dude, I had this little tiny little vial, and it was like barely enough to fill the bottom, and I thought, I was like, look at me. I found gold. That was the coolest thing in the world.
Well, Tom Brown said I need to go visit the Apostle Islands on Lake Superior. Beautiful. Yeah, I'm just going to take like 2 weeks, and we're going to go do that. And I think anything more than 2 weeks, and I'll just be sick of it. It'll feel like a job. And the whole goal is not really. It's just me and my 2 kids, and it's not go up there. I mean, it'd be kind of cool. I go up there and find a freaking, hey, look, a 14-ounce block, right? But I know that's not going to happen. That's not realistic. I plan on going up there. If I get 2 flakes, great. I'll probably drink a 6-pack of beer in an entire 2-week period, because it's just me and my kids. But I think it'll be fun, and it'll get my kids kind of geared up for something that's different. And I'll guarantee they go back to school, and none of their friends will have ever done anything like that.
Yeah. John Wilburn's got one. The piston is up with the rockers closed and the distributors pointing at number 1. That is a 3-fer. That is reference to Oak Island. So there's your Oak Island poll for that they find.
I don't do that show, man. I think I told you that.
It's the Nothing Island. I've been watching it for 7-8 years of nothing.
Season 2, I was so sick and disgruntled. Like, F this place, man. I've dealt with bad morale. I was in the Navy 23 years. There was bad morale on every freaking ship, right? But man, these guys, it's like they delivered. Oh, dude, we found a piece of wood the first time we drilled. Okay. The entire season was all about that wood, and they never found a dang thing, right? And it's like, oh, I give up. I'm not watching this any longer. And then, that's what it kind of felt that way with the gold shows, because it was Hoffman's. The Hoffmans couldn't find, I don't know, the nose on their face the first 2 seasons, right? And when they started falling around Parker and Tony, and I'm not a big fan of Tony Beats. I think he's funny and stuff like that, and I like to listen to him yell at people because he's just like, this would be me if I was a gold miner. But the thing I don't like is that he's very cutthroat.
Well,
those guys, right? And maybe that's the way you got to be.
Yeah, you got to be like that. Andy, I will look at that part number, the Edelbrock 2828. I don't know off the top of my head. I will take a look at that, and I will. Now, I'm going to be at the track all day tomorrow. Man, it's such a hard job. But Friday, I'll be back in the office, so I'll take a look at that. So be looking for something on Friday from me. It'll probably be Friday afternoon.
So Mopar, Travis Mopar Garage says, Professor P, I got my Sniper X-Flow. Do you know where to get the Holly Sniper EFI PC software?
I honestly have no idea. I've never messed with a Holly Sniper anything. So
I have Holly HP on my race car, and it came with the dang EFI. Now, but you can go download it. I want to say from hollyefi.com or something. You can download the latest software and then put that on your computer. And it even has all the software updates and the hardware updates, I believe. Let's see here. Clint Street Machines. Hey, pirates used wood. There must be treasure here.
Right. He's so right, man. That's, we found traces of gold elements in the dirt. I'm like, oh, come on. Where do you think dirt comes from? It's got it in there, of course. We found trace this. We found trace that. You haven't found shit.
Dude, I'm telling you, I think the TV show that I'd be in for, no lie, would better than Oak Island. Would be the search for El Dorado, down in freaking Colombia or Peru or wherever the heck that's at. That golden, the Aztec, or not Aztec, the Incan gold city, right? Yeah. I'd be down for that one.
Yeah, for me, it would be the Lost Dutchman mine. I've actually looked for the Lost Dutchman mine. I've done that.
Which one's that?
That's the one that's in the in Superstition Mountains, just basically east of Phoenix.
It's Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona.
Yeah, no, I've actually read about that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's a it's it could be a wives' tale. We don't know. I mean, all these are who knows, but the map is there's no starting point. There's basically just you got to figure it out. But you just kind of go out there, and it's actually just a big you can get into real trouble out there because it is the Superstition Mountains and it is Arizona, so it gets hot and there's snakes and they have the Mojave green rattlesnake out there, but. It's really beautiful country. I mean, that's the one thing I do miss about living here, is that you don't have the desert anymore. But yeah, I did get out there and get to look for that for 3 days. We hiked around those mountains looking for Lost Dutchman mine. Didn't see anything, but still fun.
Huh. Yeah. I do like that with a lot of the old 1800s gold mining stuff because the machines are what fascinates me, and it's not so much like the old the wooden sluice box. That's not the thing that fascinates me. What fascinates me is the rock crushers, the what's the other one's called? The dredge on the boat, right?
Yeah.
The dredge on the boat is so freaking cool.
It's just amazing. It's like, dude, who thought of this? You
I
what
know,
mean? Like,
they are smart, man. Whoever came up with that is super smart. What's my biggest downfall of having a mining operation where I can't even think about bulldozers or excavators even being part of it?
I'll build a boat.
Put it all on a freaking paddle wheeler.
And you know what? I'm just going to make a big area for water, and I'm just going to move it back and forth, and I'll just keep replenishing the water. It doesn't even need water, really.
I'll have a mobile pond. I'll move the pond and not the boat.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh my God, this guy's a freaking genius.
Yeah. Travis is asking a question. No, Travis,
Right.
I have a fast EFI system on it. Basically, it's basically just a throttle body right now. And then I'm going to run, I think it's the fast EFI system. It's going to be a standalone. I actually have a computer that is going to be programmable. Right now I'm running, the throttle body is non-programmable. It's basically, I'm doing it in many steps as far as this fuel injection. The first step is, can it learn and do better on its own than a carburetor? I'm not going to say anything, but I don't think so. The next computer is going to be something that I can program, but it's going to be a throttle body, but there's going to be no timing control. So this would be the next step. And then the third step is going to be multi-port fuel injection with timing control. So that one's going to be basically the one that I think is going to be the best one. The Slant 6 is a little funny as far as how it wants its fuel. It's not like everything else. So there's as soon as you step on the throttle, the vacuum goes way down. So it wants to put a lot of fuel in. So you're really backing fuel off, and you're really trying to play with fuel pressures. And, so we're going to make it its own fuel table, and we're going to see if we can get something better for it. But that's the next step.
Well, so there's a couple of things coming up here. Sure. Like Levi was saying that he worked on the first rock crusher design that was designed in 1835, I believe, is when the second plant started. They made 4 cannons for the Civil War. 3 still exist. Wow. See, is the old machines like the hit and miss engines? Oh, I am freaking. I love those all day long. I will watch one of those things run. The video on YouTube that got me, I must have seen it 1,000 times. I've watched it. There's one where it sat outside for 50 years without running, and the guy went and put oil on it, heated it all up, and then started it up. Yes. And it was like, oh, this is amazing. Yeah. Right? The old machinery like that really gets me because all right, so the reason why I say that is there's a difference between being a gearhead today than there was a gearhead 100 years ago. Okay. Yeah. And the big one is this. A gearhead today, you can literally open a catalog and buy a part for what you want. Yes. Right? It's a completely different ball game when no one's made a camshaft. Right? No one's made a part. You are the one having to make the part. You are the one having to figure it out. Right? That, to me, is real deal. That's where you're you're cutting edge, as they call it. And that's the stuff that I like. I really like making something work that's not supposed to work, that's outside the box. It's so stupid. Most people wouldn't even try it, but it's rewarding by doing it, right? Yeah. That's why I like that 300 Buick and make it run. I mean, literally, the first 2 years was the only one that came with a performance 4-barrel. The last 2 years was 2-barrel only. It was like the 318, right? Didn't the 318 only come with a 4-barrel in a police car? Something ridiculous like that. Let's see. All right. Okay, so Mostly All Parts and Rust says, you guys need to watch Ghost Town Living about the Cerro Gordo silver mines in California.
Yeah, I watch all that stuff. I've actually been to a lot of these on my dirt bike. In California, I used to ride my motorcycle everywhere. We would try to go places. I had a riding buddy. I'll only use his first name. I call him Tony, and he was also, a very, very good rider. We would actually go out and seek mines out, and so we've been all over California, Death Valley, Southern California, parts of Arizona, Nevada. riding on motorcycles, looking for mines and doing this stuff. So yes, that is one of my favorite things to do, is basically find old goat trails and ride your dirt bike there. So yes, I've been all through that stuff. I love it.
So Danny Boyd's saying that not every gearhead racer can get by without making parts. Yeah, there's definitely
Unless you're a Chevrolet guy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's one thing I did notice is the more I dove down into racing parts, the more nothing fit and it had to be custom made.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
And so Clint Street Machines said Clint must have got himself this Rivy. He was sending me pictures of this '68 Rivy, I think it was. Dallas, any opinions on the Buick 434 barrel? It's a good engine. We definitely have to open up the oil suction side if you want to do anything else to it, because that's their downside. That block had the small 7/16 passage all the way up to 1970. So Tom Brown says, Dallas, if you love old engines, you need to go to Rolag, Minnesota, Steam Threshers reunion. It is awesome. I'll tell you, I grew up in Illinois, pretty much like, till I was 18 years old. And then I joined the Navy and I saw the world. But before that, when I was in Illinois, the cool thing around 4th of July and all the summertime Midwestern parades in each small town was they would normally have a gathering of like old engines or like old farm machinery, right? And that's the stuff I really got the love for, because my grandpa used to like this stuff, but they had some small engines that were literally like a flywheel engine, and it was meant to run belts, right? And you would run belts for like a tanning machine, or you would run belts for like an auger, and these small engines would make a Briggs look like a freaking monster, right? Yeah. And they're really small. Some of them are like probably no bigger than 12 inches tall, and they'd have a big flywheel on them, and you'd put a little bit of oil and gas mixture in, or diesel and whatever it is, I don't know, and you'd spin that flywheel, and that sucker would run like all day on that little thimbleful that you put in there. It's just they're just so neat, and they would be sitting on tables, and there'd be 200 of them lined up, and they'd all be running at the same time.
Totally seen it too.
Yeah, and it's like, man, that is so freaking awesome. I would sit there and watch them things run all day and just be enthralled with it.
Yeah. Here's one. I've always been into engines and in like aircrafts and boats and stuff. There's actually a place, if you guys Google this, it's called Jerome, Arizona. And they have like this, the Jerome gold mine there. And they have this, it's an old pump engine. It's massive. It's literally 2 stories tall. And huge pistons. And the exhaust, what they did is they set up these, and it looks like 3 cannons for like a battleship, and they're literally that big around, and they sit out, and it points out to the canyon. Now Jerome's on the side of this canyon, and it overlooks Cottonwood. And what that guy is, it's $20 to fire this thing up, and it runs on propane. And he gets this thing fired up, and it's going, and it's just a massive thing going. And then he'll take it to the other side, and then what he does is he's running it, and the flywheel's huge. And he shuts it off, and then he turns it back on when that thing's going, and that thing it'll ignite the fuel in the pipes, and you watch these flames shoot out like 15 feet long out of these cannons, and it is so loud, and it echoes all the way down the canyon, all the way back. It's in Jerome, Arizona. You have to go and see that before you go. It's awesome. It's an amazing time.
Those things fascinate me. The engines, the early engines. The other things are like anything Tesla, like Tesla coils. Not Tesla car. I can give a crap about that thing, but the Tesla coil, anything that he did that was the cutting edge beginning of electricity is really fascinating to me. And I think they're more educated now, and that's what makes it kind of dumbed down and kind of suck, because like Tesla was Nikola Tesla was famous for being at the the World's Fair, like in Chicago. I think it was Chicago. White Westinghouse got the deal, and they had all these light bulbs set up, but Tesla had his own little booth, and he literally was like walking around with these Tesla coils like arcing off of this dude as he's walking around, and there's so much electricity around him. He's holding a fluorescent bulb, and the thing's lit up. He's just got his fingers. He's just holding it, right? Yeah. And this thing is lit up, and it's like, Okay, one, OSHA would be all over you. You couldn't even do anything like that today.
Not anymore, right?
The EPA would have so many questions. They'd have you shut down and the thing taken apart, and it would be the federal government would like ruin it completely. But it's just so interesting that things like this were actually done in America when there was no understanding of what was bad and what was good, and you know what I mean. It was cutting edge. So you're finding out what the bad and the good is, and that's what's cool about it. Let's see.
Tesla is I think is the smartest man that ever lived. That's just my opinion as far as an inventor. Let's put it that way. He was way ahead of his time, and he's probably the one person I actually idolize is Nikola Tesla.
Well, and I think, he probably was onto something about that wireless transmission thing. I've heard stories, and and my family is never creepy enough to go any of these places with me because I went to New York City, and they still had that freaking that Tesla coil and tower. I can't remember what island that is. But it's like right there in New York City. And then there was another one out in Colorado, and they were testing, right? And it literally like caught, I don't know, 20 telephone wires on fire or something around this thing. Yeah. And it's like, holy crap. What are they? But it also like blacked out the entire area a couple of times. But I want to see.
Probably from like an EMP or something.
I have I know that thing was pulling like super duper amounts of power, right? But he was definitely so far ahead of his time. The other one that interests me is and we're getting way off of car stuff topics here and questions, but have you ever seen his harmonic resonance device?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's the one that interests me, and I'll tell you why. That actually does somewhat work, and the reason why I know this is if you've ever been in the military, when you march, they teach you how to march, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone is in step to a sequence in a song. Mm-hmm. But when you come to a bridge, everyone walks across the bridge.
That's
Why?
Right.
Because if you march across that bridge, it will get to its resonant frequency on that bridge, and it will absolutely shake itself apart with you on it. Uh-huh. And he had like a little swinging pendulum that you could resonate the frequency on it, and you would find the resonant frequency of whatever item you're trying to bring down, and it would eventually shake it to death, right? And I really think that thing would work. The other thing
they did on Mythbusters way back in the day. They built a bridge, and they built this thing with these marching, right, going across the bridge, and it fell apart. So they went to a real bridge in Southern California, and they built this thing, and they're walking onto it. You can actually Google this on YouTube. And they built something, and they went onto the bridge, and he was just like, wow, I can actually feel it starting to shake. Like they found
right.
And he's like, I'm feeling slightly disturbed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did it knock the bridge down?
No. They shut it off before. But it was actually starting to work. Like it was actually working. He was like, wow, I think this is working.
I'm telling you, he's so far ahead of his time. The other thing I really want to read some of his research stuff on magnets. Because, see, I don't think there's a lot of people have delved down deep into magnets. And I think Nikola Tesla would have been the guy that would have done it, right? Because magnetism is so closely related to electricity. And if you didn't know this, that's how transformers work, is essentially magnetism, okay? And everything that runs on AC and is converted to DC goes through essentially a transformer to do it in a rectifier assembly. But Nikola Tesla, that was his forte, was AC, when no one was using AC, right? And then you would have had to convert it to DC because everything ran off of DC at that point. So he would have dabbled in that magnetism, and I really want to see where that one goes because there's so much neat stuff about magnetism that's unknown, right? Like aluminum. Did you know aluminum, if you spin aluminum, it becomes magnetic?
Yeah, and copper tubes too. If you drop, through a copper tube, it slows down because.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you take and drop it to a copper tube, it slows down.
The magnet.
Actually, yeah, because it's actually running the electrons, and it holds it up. That's another little science trick too. I do with the kids here.
I'm telling you, there's so much to be learned from magnetism that I don't think anybody's dove into it.
I remember when superconductors came out. Remember that? I was in high school or middle school, and we froze and we started floating things with superconductors, you know?
I just remember the neodymium magnets, because what we used to do is you'd take and you could get them cheap, right? They were real cheap, like $2-3 a magnet, and nobody really knew what they were. And what you do is in school, you'd take somebody's school book, right? And you would put these magnets in there, and one of them on the notebook, and one of them on the back page of the notebook wouldn't really do much. But 20 of them on the back page of the notebook, you couldn't pick the notebook up, right?
Yeah.
It literally would rip the pages right out of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, we used to screw with them like that, because you'd open it all the way up, get to the back page, put all that stuff on there, and then you close the notebook up.
And then can't pick it up.
What the hell is going on with this notebook?
Yeah. Man, we already hit 2 hours, man.
Yeah, we're flying through it tonight.
Man. Well, like always, if there's a question that I didn't get to, because we were just having fun here today, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. Once again, slantdailygarage@yahoo.com. And I'm actually caught up 100% on all my emails. And I'm going to look one last time. Yes, I am 100% caught up. So I'm good. So if you want something and you didn't want to put it in the chats, send it over and I'll get to it.
And I want to thank you for coming by and checking us out on Wednesday if you hadn't been here before. Also, I guess while we were doing this live, somebody absolutely murdered my the eBay store for AHRA. So thank you very much for doing that. I haven't got to figure out who that is yet, but thanks for nailing it down. Let's see here. It's going to take too long for me I got to update my app now before it even let me open it. So,
before I go though, I did want to say I have a customer's car here. It did show up. So I have a customer's car. Well, actually, it's not customer. It's a viewer's car. He sent his car all the way from Texas. Basically, I had it dropped off in my front yard, and it's a 64 Slant 6 car, push button, convertible, Dart. And I'm going to rebuild the Slant 6 in that thing. I'm going to make a little ongoing series about that thing. So, yeah. So, if you want to see all the tricks that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be doing a step-by-step on that. And I'm going to do everything that I've done to a Slant 6. I'm going to do it on this, but he's going to make it a driver. And, but, yeah, we're going to do all the cool stuff. So, keep posted for that. That's all I got really going on. And the cookie monster. Because I'm going to destroy some fools in the 281050 class, suckers.
Yeah, well, and I got the un-EFI conversion. I'll be the only guy going opposite of everyone else here in the next 20 years. So I got that coming up on the Ford truck. It's about to get carbureted with some of GM's finest Quadrajet, which is probably going to make Chris Cox from Fab Race Mod Repeat puke a little bit when I say that, but Quadrajet this Ford truck. So I'll see you guys next week, and thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, take it easy, guys. Have a good night.